What's up? What's up? What's heading in? It's yours truly, Javon Freeman, back with another one. I want to start this off by saying, add my, I was doing good. Add my Instagram at b.o.m.experience. Give me a like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Even give me a dislike if you don't like what's going on. I think this one's going to be a good one. Question that they will be discussing is, why did Malcolm X and Martin Luther King drastically change? I think this is a very great question because what I've also come to realize is that a lot of people don't do research in their own spare time. A lot of people aren't taking the initiative to, when they're on their phone, they don't take the time to say, hey, let me just Google a random question, see what pops up, and all that good stuff. So I think this will be good. Um, a nice conversation to have. Let's get into it.
King was more radical in his philosophy than Malcolm X towards the end of his life.
So the question was, let's just run it back so you can see it. Yeah.
Martin Luther King, nah, that's not a question. All right.
Mhm.
Please speak about why many argue Martin Luther King was more radical in his philosophy than Malcolm X towards the end of his life.
I don't agree with that observation. I think that both of them are going through extreme changes in various ways towards the end of their lives. For Malcolm X, of course, number one, he was breaking away from the Nation of Islam, the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. He's breaking away from a more fringe form of Islam, embracing a more traditional form that he encountered during his trip to Mecca. But also, I think he was becoming more, in some ways, mainstream in terms of politics. He was not as anti-white as he was when he was a part of the Nation of Islam. He was began to be more collaborative in terms of the groups he was engaging. He's beginning to become more overtly political. He was forming his own organizations. Um, his views regarding uh, being more anti-capitalist and so forth were coming more to the fore. King, on the other hand, was becoming more comprehensive in his views regarding issues of poverty, not being just an American problem for American blacks here, but internationally. Um, he was still, in many ways, still committed to nonviolent resistance. He did not want to embrace the Black Power movement for various reasons. So in some ways, they were converging in their views. And I think that that's something that's oftentimes lost. King, I think some will say was becoming more radical because he is not oftentimes depicted today uh, uh, accurately, given how he was changing towards the ends of his life. We had this king, this idea of king of being the integrationist, the person who was radically nonviolent, which he was, but he was becoming more radical in terms of the scope of his view on how things could change, not just in this country but internationally. I think that was causing a lot of problems. He was really committed to improve.
Hold on. Yo, as you can see, I was doing some typing. I was preparing some stuff for y'all. Uh, there we go. Yeah, we'll get to that in a second.
Improving the conditions of workers in this country, which a lot of people didn't like. And so there are parts of King's thought, his activities that were becoming more radical. But I don't think it's right to say that he was becoming more radical than Malcolm X. I think they were both changing dramatically at the end of their lives. And in a lot of ways, they were coming uh, more closely together in their views than people give them credit for. They only met once in their lives, and had a brief personal conversation once. But as far as their views and kind of the things they want to be a part of and how they thought the country should change, they were kind of converging a lot of in some ways. I mean, Malcolm X was still a nationalist, King was still an integrationist, but to say that he'd become more radical than Malcolm X, I don't think that was the case at all.
All right, I have two questions. What sparked King's interest in fighting poverty? Are you aware of that?
Yeah. I think King. Now, one of the main differences between King and Malcolm X is the way their upbringings, their childhoods. King had a life of comfort in a lot of ways, and Malcolm X struggled mightily with poverty because his father died when he was very young. His mother had a drastic mental collapse when he was young. And so he was really a person who experienced extreme poverty during his youth, whereas King came up in a very middle class environment. King chose, in many ways, to live a life of poverty as he got older. Poverty is probably too strong a word, but he didn't. He could have had a very comfortable life financially. He could have stayed in the church. He could have become an academic, had a comfortable academic job, and probably still participated in the civil rights movement. But he chose to commit his life fully to the struggle for racial equality. So I think his experience, not having the comforts of the church, not having the comforts of an academic job, a part of his campaign, they went to Chicago. He maintained residence in Chicago, and he experienced living amongst the poor there for a period of time. So I think his own life experiences gave him more a sense of what it was to live in poverty as he got older, not when he was younger. Whereas for Malcolm X, his own experiences during his whole childhood and even later in life, Malcolm X never had any financial security, and so he understood what it was to live like that in a much more profound way than King ever did. But King, I guess, through certain experience that when he got older, began to recognize how impactful poverty was, not just race, but also class on a person's sense of well-being.
Okay. He said it. I didn't want to jump the gun. I do not believe, and this is just me personally throughout my research, um, and what AI alludes to, and I'll show you that in a second. Malcolm Malcolm X, yes, fought for economics. He found his vision through economics for black people, from what I can tell, through the Nation of Islam. But that's because the Nation of Islam was more of a radical sector toward more traditional practices in Africa. Uh, so there was already a practice in the teachings of do for self economics and things of that nature, and the importance of economics. Martin is a little different. And I truly, and from my research, I think that conversation with him in economics became more important due to a couple of things. One, him being a part of the Boule, and as he gets him getting older, understanding just how much damage he did to not only himself but to the community. Being a part of the Boule, he was a part of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Again, I'm not necessarily faulting him because even I, at one point, was pledging for that organization, um, and then I stepped away after once it got to a certain point where I told them certain things I would not go for. It tries to get you to those type of organizations try to get you to fall short on your principles. It's a form of brainwashing and whatnot. And these are conversations that I'm actually having. You know what? Just so you can see for yourself. I think I said it in a prior video. If you watch the movie School Days, produced by Spike Lee, um, that movie is anywhere from 80 to 95% accurate. I mean, 80 to 95 is a big jump, but that minimum number is 80. That's still a lot. Let's see. Yep, just so you can see it. I still get emails. I had just got some emails not too long ago, and I was sitting there trying to unsubscribe because I don't take part in none of that. Uh, yep, just so you can see it yourself. Hmm. Let's see. And the date is up there as well. See that date now. Let me. Probably won't show anymore. Probably deleted the rest of them. Oh, wait. 2021. I'll probably delete. Oh no, I still got them. Yep, application window extension, all that good stuff. Now, I mean, with this coming out, it's gonna be easy for them to say, "Oh no, he's not a part of it." But I just got emails this year, 2025. This is all the way back in 2019. Uh, Now they're saying there are issues with the application with that, so they cover themselves just in case you stop. But you see where that's coming from, Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. So as you get older, that stuff starts to weigh on you. Joining in the boule, and either if it doesn't weigh on you, that says a lot about your character. And Malcolm X went through the same thing, joining Muslim the Muslim practice, but the subgroup here in America. Um, and I don't know if they'll release those files, but I think the speculation amongst everyday people is that he was killed by those in the Muslim group. I don't know. I don't know. I'm speculating allegedly. Uh, but yeah, that's where the economics portion comes into it. And now the other part where MLK, and I believe, uh, ended up having more of a focus on economics was after that one-time interaction with Malcolm X. And that's important because with Malcolm X journeying over to the Mecca in Africa and seeing that it's not so much based off of like, okay, race biases practiced in America is really an American thing only, and that's like colonial America. And the rest of the world is based off of classism. You see, so it's a different type of economic view when you understand that it's not race is just a thin layer on top of a multi-layered system that has been put in place for arguably thousands of years now, and it's one of the most recent layers. Uh, yeah, let's get back into this, and now I'm gonna pull up a thing on AI with a couple questions just so you could see for yourself.
Numerous leaders speak about this. There seems to be a disconnect with this generation in regards to when you are doing the work and having financial security.
It's a sac. Well, they both made a conscious choice um, to do away with the comforts of wealth. Now, King, I think even more so than Malcolm X, could really exploited his position and had a lot of financial gain because he was the orator, the connections he had through the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Again, could have had a
And then also remember, you being a part of Boule, we know for a fact now, look at how intertwined the Boule is into our churches. We know our churches don't stand on anything anymore. The men in the churches is why you say you could have stood on the churches, but then again that would have weighed down on his character because we're not stupid. If MLK was the guy he was to get the women he had back in the day, because mind you, money doesn't unlame you. If you were lame, you're lame. And now don't get me wrong, joining a fraternity does flock women to you, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to score. MLK was known to score, so with that being said, he would being around the men that actually would have these conversations. He would know that his character at some point would be up for question. And back then, it was even more well known that the practices that took place behind closed doors when you're trying to join in these boule organizations were not anything of good value and moral compass and of high integrity. Anyway, let's get into it.
comfortable academic job, his role as a pastor of a church, but he decided not to do that. But I mean, I think for King and for X, I recognize that that allowed them a certain amount of freedom to not to have to rely on their livelihoods from certain benefactors who, once they control or once they contribute a certain amount of financial support to an organization, they could kind of control the message as well. I think they understood that very early on. So they kind of cut those ties and allowed them to be kind of free in what they would express.
And last question in regards to Malcolm X and the growth of his philosophy. Do you think he experienced a lot of internal conflict while he was still with the nation? Because it seemed like his views changed, but he wasn't able to express them because they didn't coincide with the views of the nation at the time.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I think this is an interesting point. This might take us a little bit off topic, but when Malcolm X joined the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad was the unquestioned leader of the organization. They still paid homage to Brother D. Farad
I
and
know
so
where
forth,
he's
but he
going
was
with
an
this.
unquestioned leader. A problem with institutions when they become stronger, because the Nation of Islam was not really prominent before he got there. He really grew the organization in sort of
Mm-hmm.
terms of number of mosques, in terms of its prominence amongst the media and so forth. Malcolm X really grew the nation a great deal. All right. The problem with institutions when they grow is that leaders at the beginning of these organizations are usually viewed as being charismatic figures, right?
Mm-hmm.
Once the institution becomes established and once it begins to grow, charisma starts to wane as the institution becomes more important. Now, they had a problem in the Nation of Islam in that even though Elijah Muhammad was the leader, Malcolm X was seen as being far more charismatic. Elijah
Yep.
Muhammad was never a great public speaker. He didn't have the personal charisma that Malcolm X had. So that, of course, caused a great amount of tension, where the young minister is the one who seems to be growing the organization so much. But there's another
And that what he's speaking to is this principle of don't outshine the master. And now here's the other thing. Two things can be said, or certain things can be said about this, because as a martial artist, I understand this too. As a master, are you really a master if you don't, you know, widen the path for those that are coming after you? And then the other part is, are you really a master if you don't understand that at some point you won't always have the shine? Like when I being in martial arts and when I first joined capoeira, shout out to my professor, Ogozino. Um, One thing that I didn't want to overstep with was the fact that I know many martial arts, and it's not that I have this master, that master, that master. No, a lot of this is self taught, but because it's a rep, it will seem as if I went to a specific master, and that's due to dedication and this, that, and third. But that comes with expertise and time practice, which would then throw you into that master category. So, in a sense, I'm a master in my own right because I put in the time, effort, dedication to rep the same thing time and time again to become specialized in certain aspects of the art. Um, However, I could never outshine our professor because in his one specific art, he had did that one thing for 20 plus years. So as much talent as I had, as much potential as I had, where I could excel very quickly, I still couldn't piece it together as fast. So now you got to sit there and say, well, shoot, just because someone's more talented doesn't mean he's outshining you, right? That's now the conversation of ego. But we're almost through with this.
point to be made in that there's some question as to how much the Nation of Islam was a religious organization for Malcolm X or was seen as like a social political organization, right? Some believe he really had a religious awakening when he went to Mecca. For many, he viewed the nation as being a means of creating social change, not really religious change. But the conflict for Malcolm X was that the Nation of Islam never sought to be a political organization, right? They didn't demonstrate, they didn't protest, they spoke against the powers that be in a lot of ways. But that tension always existed within him because he wanted to be more politically active. The nation didn't want to do that. Theologically, now in terms of his beliefs and tenets, that break really came when he went to Mecca and saw for himself. That some of the things that they were teaching weren't really in line with the traditional views of Islam. So I mean,
Yeah, so all right. Now after that I want to take you to Chat GPT so you can see for yourself. So I asked Chat GPT a couple questions. Why did MLK Jr. Malcolm X change as people before their assassinations? Both MLK and Malcolm X Jr. underwent significant changes in their personal beliefs and philosophies. So let's get into this a little bit. For MLK, commitment to nonviolence and integration largely influenced by Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy. Uh, okay, in the years before his assassination, views began to evolve for several reasons. Frustration for slow progress within the civil rights movement. Um, King also began to believe that fighting for economic justice was just as important for fighting for civil rights. Now, let's get into this. Okay. Uh, By the late 1960s, King began to shift his focus beyond civil rights legislation towards addressing poverty and economic inequality. He launched the Poor People's Campaign in 1968, which aimed to unite poor people of all races to demand economic justice. This was a broader critique of the capitalist system that had perpetuated inequality, and he called for a guaranteed income for all Americans. Now, a little bit of that is communistic, but here's the other portion of this. I think this is really important. Where he sits here and say, which aim to unite poor people of all races to demand economic justice. What does that sound like? Bacon's rebellion. Remember, Bacon Bacon got people of all races in the Virginia colony. to rebel. Well, granted, for some selfish reasons of his, but it highlighted something very important, that if you get rid of race and you focus on one common denominator, which is the economics or resources, race no longer matters. It's not a big deal as people make it out to be when it comes to societal situations. When it comes to a biological thing, yes, your melanation factor does play a role into it. However, when we're looking at societal things, it's not as big as a deal that people make it out to be. It's more about resources. Now, and the also portion of this was the Vietnam War, and we also know with Vietnam, that helped fund the war on drugs, guns, and we also see now today just how much corruption there is in the U.S. government and in the United States as well. I just listened to I think it was Anton Daniels, and he put up a clip how they're talking how Elon Musk said that there's like 6.5 million people, something like that, listed as 112 years old, but on the planet, as far as we know, only 10 people exist that are 112 years old. And those 6.5 million people are still getting payments from the federal government, which is crazy. Or 150 years old, something like that. So now we get into Malcolm X, his pilgrimage to Mecca, encountered Muslims of all races, including white Muslims, saw the potential for race unity in the Islamic faith. He wrote about his transformation in his letters, describing the trip as deeply spiritual. What did I tell you about the word spiritual? Spirit means energy. They're synonymous, just so you can see it for yourself. Uh, Synonymous for spiritual energy includes soul energy, divine, and that's not one. Uh, okay, let me refine it. Spirit, spirit is synonym for energy. Yes, spirit can be considered a synonym for energy, particularly referring to a person's vitality, health, well-being, homeostasis, equilibrium, enthusiasm, energy, or expenditure of effort, work, which would then boil down to potential or kinetic energy and inner drive, intrinsic energy, where spirit signifies a lively and active force within them, similar to the concept of energy. Now, yes, context does matter, of course. Um, as you see here, many the sources list spirit as a synonym for energy. See, so now let's get back into AI. All right. The trip as describing the trip as deeply spiritual or energetic experience that helped him see the broader potential for racial reconciliation. Remember, in America, most countries started adopting racial biases after the Virginia colony and Bacon's Rebellion had took place, or Bacon's Rebellion in the Virginia colony had took place, and then the elites, or the upper social class, um, sought to protect the resources by adding another barrier of confusion amongst the people so they could not unite. And now here's another thing. Uh, so what AI doesn't tell you about this when it comes to Malcolm X, when you learn another language outside of the Romance languages, you end up seeing just how intelligent the human species really is. Marhaba, kefu haluka, shukran habibi, shukran jamila, ahlan bik. I can go on and on. but that's a Semitic language. Semitic languages have been around for much longer than the Romance languages, and we can arguably say that the Romance languages, like Latin and Greek, are derived from Semitic languages. When you go further back into history, there's also evidence that the indigenous Indians of America, or the indigenous people of the Americas, were speaking forms of Semitic languages in America, doing trade with Africans across the Atlantic Ocean, right? And has been inscribed in there. I think some of the findings are, I think the Incas, Peru, somewhere in Peru. There's proof of it. Some of the, I think some of Argentina and some of Chile, and I think parts of Brazil. Ancient artifacts have been found with um, Semitic language writings in the Americas. And I also think a couple pyramids in the Grand Canyon have proof of it too. And when I say Grand Canyon, I mean North America. So when you start to understand languages, you start to see that there's more power and intellect and intent behind the things you say. Shukran Habibi is very, very much more impactful than thank you, love. I said the same thing, but Shukran Habibi, and there's more effort that has to be put into it, and there's more intent. Shukran Jamila, there's a lot more intellect. Thank you, beautiful. Cool. But the English language is short, abbreviated, it's a lot faster. Shukran Jamila, even though it's a derivative of ancient Semitic languages, there's still a lot of effort that has to be put into it. There's a lot more effort that has to be elicted from the throat. Uh, those are certain letters or symbols. Um, so it's when you go to these places, you gotta pick up the language so you can understand for yourself. And Malcolm, being as intelligent person he was, there's no doubt. And I try to lead with the assumption that our ancestors and elders were just as smart, if not smarter. I try not to even cut them down to say our ancestors were dumber. Because if we just say that they were just as smart, you would have to assume that there were people that were below bar anyway. There are people today that are below bar, don't care. So now the next thing that I want to get into is that I asked the question, what did Malcolm X learn about indigenous America? And then this is very important. Recognition of the struggles against colonialism and oppression, experiences abroad helped, particularly with his interactions with various countries during his travels, help him connect with the struggles of Black Americans with those of indigenous people. Um, he began to recognize both groups share common experiences: colonialism, displacement, and systematic violence, which is very true, perpetuated by European powers and their descendants, exposed to anti-colonial movements in Africa, Asia, and Middle East, helped them see a connection between indigenous peoples, struggles for self-determination, and the struggles of Black Americans. Now, Black Americans, and I don't think he knew this at the time because there's more information today. When you look at the paperworks, of the slave ledgers, and then how even in the newspapers and in certain government writings and in letters sent between people within echelons of government and at universities, you see the transition of having to integrate the slaves that were brought over from Africa and integrating them into the people of America, the indigenous population. And once they integrated, you could no longer tell them apart because we almost look the same. We're both melanated. And this is what is also being uncovered in a lot of media. You start to see a lot of uh, uh, predominant people today speak about these things where there were already people of melanated descent here in the Americas. Not every person of color was brought over from Africa. It's not possible. The math doesn't math on that. There's too much information for the math to math on that. So now when you put it at that, you would then have to say, well, damn, where did all these terms come from? That is political war terminology. Why? Because now if you sit there and say, hey, you're Black, but we don't know if you're really African, or we don't know if you're really indigenous, we can't give you reparations because we don't know who's who. You see what I'm saying? So now when you sit there, And when you change the history, right? So now another portion where you look at the Curtis Act, and this is where a lot of millionaires say, well, and I get where people sit there and say, well, if we had our own, the the sentiment is true, but a lot of things, the ball has already been rolling on a lot of things, so we got to move forward with what we got. However, in the Curtis Act in the early 1900s or very late 1800s, eliminated indigenous tribes from having their own schooling system. Right. So this is where it's like, and then when you see post civil rights, you end up seeing how black communities started to fail. It's commonly known that prior to civil rights, black or indigenous groups or melanated groups thrived the same way new melanated people thrived in America. But with the Curtis Act, when you take the Curtis Act and you couple it with civil rights movement, you can then get rid of the schooling so that you can re-propaganda, so you can propagandize and reshift and indoctrinate um, next generations of people, right? And then you get more workers within your own system. Uh, So yeah, this is saying the same thing. Solidarity with indigenous struggles. By the time of his death, Malcolm X was increasingly speaking out in solidarity with oppressed people around the world, including indigenous people, on his views on Pan-Africanism, evolved from a more global perspective. Black Americans, as he continued connected to the struggles of oppressed peoples everywhere. Malcolm likely would have recognized the indigenous people struggles for sovereignty and cultural survival as a key component to a larger fight against imperialism and racial oppression. So that right there is enough to make you say, especially if you can get away with it as a government, knock him off. Especially if you built an economy based off of racial separation, right? And you can't say that these people, it's conspiracy that they didn't. There were laws put in place, and then other nations attribute what they did, like South Africa and apartheid. They sit there and openly say, "Yeah, we got this shit from America." So um, okay. Although specific references to indigenous American activists like the American Indian movement or specific indigenous leaders are not abundant in his speeches, his rhetoric certainly resonated with the struggles of indigenous communities for survival and justice. His endorsement of resistant movements around the world, such as those in Africa and Latin America, paralleled the aspirations of indigenous communities and the Americans fighting for land, cultural preservation, and independence. And here's my thing too: if they didn't kill Malcolm X, if this is the case, and it says it was not abundant in his speeches, that means he did speak on it. So he must have known at some point in time prior to his death that Americans were always indigenous. That destroys a narrative. Imagine if that narrative ended up becoming the much predominant narrative way back when. Right. And then that was without the technology. Imagine how much further as a nation we could be. The ball is already rolling, integration is already rolling, but you know, um, now, Malcolm X's understanding of indigenous America was shaped by his evolving worldview in his early years, primary focus on Black Americans, but as he traveled the world and learned more about colonialism and global struggles for justice, he began to see more clearly the struggles of indigenous people. While he did not make indigenous rights a central focus of his activism, his broadened perspective meant that he saw interconnectedness of all struggles of self-determination, justice, and freedom. Malcolm X recognition of the shared experiences of oppression between Black Americans and indigenous people can be seen as part of a larger mission to unite marginalized people in the fight against systematic racism and inequality. Uh, so I think there's a lot there. There's a lot there that I think is very important, pertinent to the conversation. Hold on, let me. Yeah, I think there's a lot there that's very important to the conversation when it comes to Malcolm X and MLK. Um, I'm not sitting here saying that they were saints. I'm not sitting here saying that they were the worst people ever. I'm saying they were human beings of their time, the same way I'm a human being of my time. And if somebody comes across this video 100 years from now Have the compassion, and I'm asking, have the compassion, understand that I'm a human being of my time. I come from New Haven, Connecticut, the own city. My primal years of being outside and understanding environment was during a time where murder, drugs, guns, uh, 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 death, was at an all time high. I thought that was normal, where I could go to my backyard and see the police digging up dead bodies from my neighbor's backyard, right? Where I could go around the corner and go to the local park and think I'm gonna have a good day, and then have to run home because I'm being shot at, not knowing if they're really shooting at me or if they're shooting at someone else. But I know that glass is falling in my near vicinity, and if I don't move, I could be the next thing hit. You see what I'm saying? So there is a level of compassion that has to be had when we look upon our elders and ancestors. However, with more information, we have to do our part to push forward the truth. We are in the age of Aquarius anyway. The truth is going to come to light, whether people like it or not. Um, like I'm gonna keep saying it right now, the energies are always in constant swing, teetering, seesawing back and forth. Uh, and metaphorically, the negative energy, for lack of better terminology, is saying they're going to have a shootout with the police to get every last little bit they can before the police take over the crime scene. But tell me what you think down in the comments below. Link to the content creators will be in the description. Give me a like, give me a dislike. Let me know how you feel. Let me know what you think. Um, I don't know if I'm going to be posting any more videos for the rest of this week. I've been a little sporadic anyway. I got to do some traveling for work. I'm gonna definitely be on the road tomorrow. I think I'm gonna vlog that, but we'll see as that goes. But anyway, y'all take care. Ciao.